Hey, and welcome to the Mark J. Ryan Experience and the Trickle Down Mindset. Finding out who you really are and what your true purpose is. Hey, everybody, it's Mark J. Ryan, and welcome to the Mark J. Ryan Experience, or MJR Experience, however you want to call it. Anyways, I'm going to work on catching you up to what I've been up to. A lot of people have been asking me and say, hey, we haven't gotten a podcast or too many mailings from you lately. I've been really busy, and doing a lot of neat, cool things and some new things that are going to come up that I think you'll be excited about. I'm going to talk a little bit about today. You know, I started doing podcasting back in 2003, 2004, I think it was. This is when it first started coming in, and I was one of the few first podcasters. And I played with a lot of different things, and when I started doing that, so that's going to be 15, 16 years ago now, where I was at with my teaching and my life was figuring out how relationships between men and women worked out and how to better improve your relationship with a man or a woman. Now, I was aiming towards guys in general, and I work with a lot of guys, but I work with a lot of women. At one point, I had a whole group of lesbians who were referring each other. They'd actually come. Sometimes I went out with them to clubs down in Ithaca, New York, and different places. Very interesting crowd. But they had perspectives, and then heard perspectives from me that they'd never heard before that helped them with their relationships. So it was a combination of how to be able to communicate and talk better with your partner, how to be in a position of what you're thinking about while you're talking, how to hold an emotion, a feeling while you're talking to that person. And it was really successful. And the reason I bring this up is it was more successful than I realized. I had a guy that came from LA a couple weeks ago, spent the day with me, did a day of coaching. And he was a young black man. Yeah, I say young, he was probably mid-30s, but to me he was still young. And he told me how long he'd been listening and how much my podcast, and even though I hadn't done any for a while from the men-women connection thing, he had recorded them and kept listening to them, how they made a difference in his career and his relationships. He had just gotten married, having a new baby, and where he was, can't talk about his work too much, but where he was, it's all upboard, more than upboard, in regard to how he was going to take the next step. And he says, okay, this has helped me to this level, but I'm ready to jump off and go to the next level. But when he explained to me all one of the things with me is that I like to know that it's working and you're getting benefit from that. And people don't always write and let you know that. I got a lot of people that do, but I'd like to see a whole lot more do that because it keeps me motivated and thinks that and I think I'm on track. So he let me know how on track I was, and I got thinking, if I knew that back then, if I could have a sense of what that was like back then, now, what I'm feeling now, what he's saying, what my shows and podcasts meant to him, it would have been a different journey. It would have been a different journey. And that's also me looking for an external source, something outside of me, to give me back. And what I didn't consider was that was already inside me. And that helped me to see that once I got confirmation from the outside, the feelings that I had were coming from the inside. And I say, why does that have to be the secondary source? Why can't that be the primary source? So in this chain, and I'll probably refer back to this guy, let's call him John. Let me just finish what he was saying. What he asked me to do on the next level basically got to how does he help the black community? How does he help young black men and women to advance and grow and learn this stuff? And so his whole passion and purpose was there. And so that I took that into account and was looking at everything we did through that lens, through that frame of saying, okay, how, if he becomes a better person, in what way does that better person help him be a better person to the community, a part of that community to help in the best possible ways? And that is to get him to open up the resources that are available to him that he can pass forward and teach other people the resources that are already inside of themselves. This will probably be a little clearer as I go on. Now, then I went into the stuff when I was working with Kevin Hogan. We went into a lot of science and neuroscience stuff, made some products with him, did some products on my own. And then from Kevin, I went into working with Joe Vitale. Now, Kevin and Joe were complete opposites in their belief systems. I had both of them. I enjoyed both of them. I love the scientific neuroscience approach with Kevin, and I love the spiritual stuff with Joe. So I had talked to Joe about making some products about how we can use some of these techniques, these neuroscience techniques, to clear up people's issues, but also introduce them to a little bit of the spiritual. And that was really successful. And then probably I'd say the last, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, it's been variations where I got into a place of like, what next? And the problem was I was still asking the questions, what do people want? What products do people want? What do they want? What are they going to buy? What's going to make sense for me to learn about or offer them a better way to do that? And what I wasn't considering more, which I am now, is what do I want to do? Because going back to John telling me about the podcast and all the different letters recently, I got a couple other letters. People say, just do something. We just want to listen to you. We want to learn from you. And so I go back and I think, well, what is going on? That was stuff I wanted to do. I was excited about doing, and I did it, and I had no idea what was going to happen with it or how popular it would become or how long of an effect it had. How John Overdorf says, you never know how far a change will go. I'm starting to see 13, 14, 15 years later. No, I'm sorry. He listened for 13 years, so that's about 15 years. So I'm thinking, what do I want to do? And then I'm thinking, well, what do I do now? What do I spend most of my time on when I'm not working with coaching with people? I do a lot of coaching on Skype. I do some still on the phone. Most of it's turning over to Skype now. And I still do some in person. And I love that. And I'm going to keep doing that. But what do I do in my time, in my spirit? And it's like back to the spiritual stuff. It's all back to the spiritual stuff. And the older I get, the more it is like, okay, it seems like for those of you that are atheists, sorry, but those that believe in a God or a bigger source or a bigger being or the universe, whatever it is, if we're going somewhere, can we get in touch with that now? Or how much can we get in touch with that now before we go there? Can we be introduced? Can we have a sense of where we're going and what we're going to be doing coming up next? And that's an interesting question to me. So I've got, I would say, probably close to 1,000 books on spirituality. Haven't read them all, read a lot of them, scanned through a lot of them. And what I decided to do is that some of the clients that I've had long term, couple years, I'd say to them, hey, look, we already knew that there was some spirituality. I said, look, this is your dime. I said, what I would like to do is go more from what issues and problems that you have into a bigger issue of your identity, who you are, and how that might connect with what else might be out there. I'd been playing around a little bit, and some magical things started happening on some of the calls where people would get like an aha or a wake-up type of experience and go, oh, one guy started laughing. He goes, none of it means anything unless I want it to mean. I said, that's exactly right. And I said, what's beyond that? What's behind that? And they start to get in touch with something that from my spiritual studies somewhere goes into non-duality. The non-duality is that, let's say that we are someone or something, or there's something out there bigger than we can recognize, that we begin to put on layers over that of who we're not, and then we start to identify with who we're not. So when a thought comes in, we get angry, and we take that identity on and take the angry identity on and then go with it and run with it. So I said, what if we start using some of the stuff that I use in the coaching to start to work on disassembling who you're not and finding out what's left, what's there. This is there's a guy, an Indian saint, I say guy, Indian saint that I've read some on. He's got a really interesting way of putting it. It's his name is Nisargadatta Maharaj, and there's some stories I can tell you that synchronicity stuff with him and some different things that went on in my life. But right now, as John would say, but I detract. I digress. Excuse me. I digress. Let me get back on track. Um, he says the system that he uses is finding out who you are by finding out who you're not. So just a simple thing that happened with me where I had one of those pop experiences. I was, and I've said this before, I'm pretty sure I was going down to John Overdurst when I was living in Mount Shasta, heading down to Phoenix, Arizona, Scottsdale actually, and going to do a 10-day seminar, 10, 12-day seminar with him. And I was listening to an audiobook on the way by Dan Ariely, the guy, he did a book called Predictably Irrational, but the one I was listening to at the time was one he had about lying. I think it was The Honest Truth About Dishonesty. And one of the things I pride myself on is how I tell the truth and how honest I am and just being open. People say, man, you got a great heart. You're really honest. And I say, well, I try to say it in a way that's kind and nice to other people. Sometimes not so nice and kind, but most of the time, and I'm a lot better than I used to be, and I'm keep working towards that goal. So I was like, okay, let's find out how other people lie, not me, how other people lie. Well, listen into that book. I think it's 6 hours or so. I've got it in here. I could probably look and find out, but you get the sense, 6 hours or so, maybe 8. Most of the way through the book, I was going like, oh man, I do that too. Now it's not there's a bigger and a lesser degree, or should I go this way? The kind where you don't even realize that you're doing it and it has a minimal effect on other people, and then there's a big one that has a big effect on people. But the deal is if you use it as a binary code, well, you're doing it or you're not doing it, versus how much are you doing it? And we like to hide in how much we're doing it. But what caught me was I'm doing it. I'm doing it a lot. But then something happened to me where it occurred to me. I was like, wait a minute. If I'm doing it, how does he know about that? It wasn't me he talked to. He talked to a whole lot of people, thousands, tens of thousands of people that he had talked to, and they had done tests and different things to find out how we are not honest about ourselves, about dishonesty, because we want to go on to the scale of, well, that wasn't bad, that was pretty good. I'm not as bad as that person. Well, okay, but are you wet or not wet? It's not how much you go into the pool. The question is, are you wet or not wet? Did you dip your toe in? Well, you're still wet. Did you do a full body dive? Yeah, you're wet. It in subscales, more wet means a lot of different things. Anyway, so I realized that's in all of us. And then it came to me, it was like, wow, if that's in all of us, as a human being, it's a pattern of the human being, human brain, how we work, how we function. And I said, but I'm bigger than that. I'm something different than that. And it kind of threw me to say, that's not me. Well, that goes into Nisargadatta stuff, neti, not this, or not this, not that. So you start to identify that this is not me. This is kind of how some non-duality or all non-duality stuff works. And this is where I spend most of my time now, is finding out how is it going to be useful. The stuff I've been working with tens of thousands of clients over the years to help them with their issues. A lot of the issues are within their duality. So it's kind of like this, back and forth within, to create a space that they can exist with more relief, more room to exist. But now, what if we turn it upside down and say, well, what if we just look at this all? Is to say that once you enter in, you dip your toe into the water, so to speak. Once you dip your toe into the water, you're wet. Once you start to separate something, you're in non-dual. So what if we look beyond non-dual? If there wasn't a non-dual, who would we be then? Anyways, I'm probably getting a little confusing to some of you. Either way, I started doing some work to say, let's get what you want done. What is your issue? What is your problem? But I started to look at that as a doorway to get into the spiritual. Because I noticed once I had these spiritual experiences and I modeled all these guys, I watched gotta be tens of thousands of hours of videos, audios, read books, about how this process works and what these people say about how they got there. And I found a lot of similarities. People say, well, you can't really figure out a way to get there. But I don't agree with that necessarily. I think you can do things to set up the chances that you're going to get there easier and better than most people. And I think that sooner or later we're going to figure out what it is going on with our brain and our mind, our emotions, our thoughts to access consciousness without, let's say, the ego. In some of the stuff we'll talk about here, we call it the default mode network. It's becoming very popular right now. It's been popular for a couple of years, but it's really starting to take on the default mode network. Who are we when we're not having the aha experiences or we're not having bad experiences? What do we default to? What is our primary alter ego? And the key word there is ego. What is our primary alter ego that we default to all the time? Well, a lot of us, and I'm going to start hitting tangents. Sorry if I don't hit a straight line, but I'll work on coming back to some of this stuff. So some of the significant research that's been going on is with psychedelics, and to say what happens when people take psychedelics. Why are there some massive changes happening with people? Yeah, there's all the stuff of the 60s and all the bad words and using psychedelics for entertainment instead of its real purpose. You can go way off on track. But if we take just a narrow purview, so to speak, of psychedelics for helping people with issues, one of the things that psychedelics does for people is to relax this default mode network, who you are. And basically, I look at it as a wheel or a hub that when a thought comes in, it has to go through the hub, your default mode network, DMN. But I'll probably keep saying default mode network. But all your thoughts have to go through that basic part of who your main alter ego is. And after a long period of time, it doesn't have access to other parts of your brain outside of the default mode network. What they found out with psychedelics is psychedelics relaxes this alter ego and your brain starts to open up. Let me give you a little visual. Hopefully this works here. Let's see. I'm not sure if it's that one. Oops. Let me bring this back up and there we go. And now let me go back to this. We got it. So when on the left is people taking a placebo, and you can look at the edges as the default mode network. I've got a little different model that I look at, but for clarification's sake and for talking to you right now, let's look at A, when they took a placebo. Basically, there are some connections to disparate or other parts of the brain, but mainly it's around the outside edges. That's the default mode network. And B is when people were given psilocybin, a psychedelic, low doses. I don't know, maybe that's a higher dose. But notice what happens in the middle of B, how that shifts and changes. All these other connections, other resources, other parts of you, other ways to maybe connect with higher parts of you start to become accessed. They become easier than that. So I looked and I said, hey, we're looking at this, but is there a way that maybe we can do something from the work that I've been doing with the NLP, with hypnosis, with all different things, John Overder's new rhizomatic theories? Can we get in touch with that? Can we trigger the default mode network without people having to take psychedelics? And the short answer is yes. And we found ways, we're working with it. John's research has been incredible. And more importantly than that, the results are phenomenal. Phenomenal. And why is that important? Let's go back to that real quick why is that important right there, the default mode network? Because within B, the connections that are made, people would see things. And sometimes when they were taking high enough doses of these psychedelics and accessing the default mode network in a relaxed mode and then accessing all these new parts of the brain, people come back and they stop smoking. They'd stop drinking. Their problems were gone. They had answers within them that were located within the connections that under the default mode network, which is picture A, they did not have access to. It wasn't there. And sometimes when we do work with people, I'd look and I'd think about it and I'm saying, we must be accessing something different, because once people get it and once they see it, they're not in this preconceived conditioned way to see life. When it opened up, they were getting healed. And there was a lot of different things going on over the years when I would do coaching with people. Some people would want to do more spiritual coaching. Who am I as beyond being a human being? I've reached the levels that I've reached. One of the things I've noticed in John's classes lately is we're getting really high performance people that are CEOs of global corporations coming in there. Well-known people, actresses, actors, people that are coaches to those people. They want to know what's the newest top of the line stuff. And we're finding out that a lot of these people want to know who they are beyond everything they can do successfully. Because when you hit a level of saying, okay, that's everything that I can do within the default mode network, let's go back to A. Are you using all your resources? Is there something in the lines within B that could let you know you're much more than that and take you in a whole direction in life and find out who you are at a new level? Bring something exciting to you. Yes, there is. This is what we're discovering when we, this summertime, and John has a different way of bringing it in through rhizomatic principles. And a rhizome is like crabgrass. It's strawberries. Rhizomatics have different, there's the arborescent model, which is the tree model, with branches of psychology or branches of thought. And there's the tree trunk, and then there's the taproot. If you can get to the taproot, we find out a lot of stuff doesn't work with that taproot theory. We had a doctor from one of the major pharmaceuticals a couple years ago that came in and told us a little bit. He was an oncologist, and he told us, right at the top, and he's telling us, hey, he goes, a lot of the drugs that are being out there used are looking for a taproot. He goes, but we know cancer is rhizomatic. That's why I was saying, well, it appeared here and it went from here to here. That's more like a rhizome than a branch or a tree. So we started looking at what the work that we'd been doing through this filter of a rhizomatic filter, and what are the qualities of a rhizome that can help us see things in a different way, maybe closer to the way the actual universe is in our brain. Actually, if you take a rhizomatic, you go up and you look for brain cells and rhizome cells, up close views, and I get a picture. I wish I'd have put it up, but I don't have it right now. I'm looking over here at a manual. Maybe I can find one of John's. Let me look and see if I can find it in here for you, the rhizome picture. But it's hard to tell the difference. John does this thing in class that we do where he holds up a picture of a rhizome, and then he holds up a picture of brain cells, and he says, which one is which? And it's hard to tell. Most people miss it. So your brain, the way it makes connections, is more nonlinear and rhizomatic than it is arborescent, like a tree. So that's how John brings in, he's not talking about spirituality like I am. I'm going to go right directly into it. He uses more metaphors of science and things like that. Figures he doesn't really need to use the metaphors, the spiritual metaphors, but they're there in his teaching. I know I got it in here. I have it in here. Let's see. Anyways, I'll just see about keep talking. Rhizomatic. Anyways, I'll bring it up. So what we did is to say, okay, if you were to connect more to this bigger part of yourself in the three principles work, which I'll get into, they say it's like an innate, it's in you. It's already in there. One of the NLP axioms is that you have all the resources you need. And I believe that. However, I don't think people have all the resources readily available to get to the resources. So there's processes, and that's part of what we work with NLP, is creating routes, bridges to these. Today I was listening to a 3P call with Jamie Smart, and it was incredible. As I sat back there, I'm like, okay, I got a sense of what's happening here and what's going on. So I had an insight into this process. And that is that what he's really good at is creating routes to resources. because the resources are already there in all of us. And that's part of the main belief system. We believe it in NLP, believe it in the spiritual work, that this is all accessible to all of us. Question is, how do you get there? Especially, how do you get there from A? Default mode network. How do you create without psilocybin, so to speak? Then, and there's a lot of ways, So I'll tell you about the summer since I started on that with John. One of the things that he did was he started working with people using these rhizomatic principles and having us focus on a different place. Now, what I do is it's when he does his rhizomatic presenting or practical practitioner, but the rhizomatic presenting is kind of like an old NLP training where he gives them an old NLP training and then he brings on his new rhizomatic stuff and works with that and then teaches people. And these were all professional people from around the world that came in. I mean, high functioning people already doing great speaking jobs. But we find that a lot of those people were doing their speaking jobs from the default mode network. Very limited in their resource. If you look at A as being the default mode network and then B being open resources, who is the person in B that if they begin to speak from that place, how does that change how they speak? And so what the amazing shifts in people as we have them start to go into the state, which I'll be explaining later on, as we had them start to go into the state, doing certain meditations and ways of thinking and shifting their ways of thinking, doing stuff with their body, they started hitting their authentic self, and they weren't used to speaking from that authentic self. And when they did, they got emotional. Everybody got emotional. It was like, wow, I've been speaking in front of people, sometimes hundreds of people that are coaching, top level athletes around the world for the Olympics and things like that, professionals and big corporations doing this. But it all kind of came from the default mode alter ego. The you that you think you are may not be the you that you are. And so when they started speaking from their authentic self, it was so emotional that they had to get used to start to speak, to act, to be who they are from that. And it was a beautiful experience to watch these people go through the transition to the end of the class when they were up there speaking from that place. It was freaking amazing. Phenomenal, where they could actually touch that and be a part of that. So then you take that and we go, the next course was the practical practitioner, which was just last month. It was down in Madison, Georgia, outside of Atlanta. It's hard to go back and, John had already given them a full NLP practitioner course so he could then implement some of those principles in with his rhizomatic principles. But after you go through that this summer, how do you now take another group that's coming to see you from around the world and not apply some of those principles? It becomes more who you are. It's hard not to do it. It's hard to go back to the old way. You can't go back to the old way because you see the world in a whole different thing, a whole different perspective or facet that's there. And it changes everything. It changes how you do your work. It changes the intention of what's happening. So we did a bunch of exercises with them as well. I say we, John. Taking them through different sequences and meditations with different binaural beats and music and isochronic tones, and that actually help synchronize you into a certain place that makes these insights that makes B more probable to happen. And being part of that transition, holding that field in a certain way for people to be able to explore that part of themselves safely is key to that. So I did a speech this summertime. I went and spoke a couple hours. I was filming for my friends Jess Marion, Sean Carson, and Sarah Carson in Las Vegas. And did that last year, and this year they said, hey, why don't you speak? And I'm like, okay. So I signed up for me. They picked me to speak for 2 hours. Spoke on Saturday morning, and I had initially signed up for hypnotic selling because I've got a selling process that works really good. That kind of brings you into a spiritual system It introduces you to it through things we have a lot of resistance to. One of them is selling. Human beings have more resistance to selling and public speaking than anything else. And so I got picked for that. And they said a few weeks later, hey, look, put in your applications for any more speeches. You don't have to limit it to one. So I said, okay, what I'll do is, and I may have already told you this, but I said I'm going to put another one in. I just made one up. I called it Hypno Mystic because mystic is a lot of the non-duality stuff and how to get in a more of a communication of our higher self to an even higher self, maybe to the universe, whatever it is, but something more than us or what we consider us from the default mode network. The kind of going back to our friendly graph here. By the way, this came from pathways.brain-psilocybin.jpg, and I'll have to get to what the site was that we were there. But anyways, to be more in touch with this, and so I just said, you know what, let me do something with hypnosis, because it was Hypno Thoughts 2019 in Las Vegas. And I notice a lot of times hypnosis can get people into that state. As Jamie Smart, I was talking to him today about it, and he said, you know, a lot of the mystical stuff, or where we're going with this, it comes from fractionation, which means going into a trance, then going out, and then coming back into a trance, finding different ways to do this. I'm trying to make my finger go, but it's opposite, so it's kind of funny. And I'm like, yeah, that's a great point, because after a while, the fractionation stops, and then you stay in the hypnosis or a knowledgeable, altered state for longer periods of time, and then we begin to learn to communicate and talk to each other, connect with each other from this place, which I'll get into in a little bit. Anyways, so I prepared for this thing for probably 8 months, because I think it was last October, a year ago, October, where they said yes, and I started preparing for it. So I started preparing for it right away, and I got to tell you, I was getting insights and different ideas on what to do, but not much was coming up. And I'm like, I got a sense of it, but when I would think about it, then the next day it was like, well, that doesn't seem important anymore. A lot of times with this work, it's so much present oriented and now orientated. I'll use it both ways there. That it's hard to try to remember something and say, I'll remember that and then use that. You can kind of get a basic idea of what you want to do. You can get an outline. That's what I ended up with, an outline. But it doesn't, your memory doesn't work the same from this place. But it works. And you can start to remember processes over content. So context and processes. I mean, there's content, context, and processes, and there's a lot more process. It's like, you know, you look and you say, how many neurons are in your brain? Well, a lot. You know, content. And how many connections with those neurons? A whole lot more. So processes have a lot of connection. So I kind of forgot where I was, but back to Las Vegas. I did this, and I had, by the end, I really had to focus and kind of go back to my brain and use my brain and say, okay, what am I? And so I made I'm looking to see if I have any in here. I don't see any, but I had these little cards. They're not little, they were bigger index cards. An index card is maybe about that size, and then I bought these bigger ones. And I had plenty of stuff to do, so if it went over or more questions, I had an abundance to choose from. So I gave myself a outline, and I like to go all over the place, as you know if you've listened to me before, that I could have all kinds of things to talk about if they occurred to me or if they popped up in my mind, and bought new books. I mean, I really was having fun over this 8-month period of time while I was doing my normal coaching and trainings and things like that. And then I got there and I did the seminar, the 2 hours, and it went great. I maybe covered 10% of the things. All these different things came up. And it reminded me of this guy I used to study, Jerry Stocking. I still like to study him, years ago, 20 years ago, whatever. No, it wasn't that long when I brought him to a seminar in Texas. We had a couple hundred people, and he was getting ready to get up. And I said, hey, Jerry, what do you got a sense that you might talk about? And he just looked at me and says, Mark, you know better than to ask me that question. And I'm like, why? He goes, I don't know till they get here. Till the people get here, I don't have us. And it was just like, oh. I was thinking you had to have all this stuff and get ready for him. But what he would do is he would open up this innate thing that's in him, that's in all of us, and he would kind of like go out and put feelers out within the audience, and he would take questions first. Give me a question, any question, and he'd get a sense of calibrating where they were at, and he would start talking about that, and then more questions would come up, and that would direct where he went. And I'm thinking, what a model, what a model. Well, with the rhizomatic stuff that we're doing with John Overdurf, a lot of that is happening right now. The same way, you don't know where it's going to be. You don't know where it's going to take. With a rhizome, it can be all over the place. It's not like a tree where you can go directly to the roots and find the root and get rid of a taproot. If it's a rhizomatic process in your system, the chances are it's going to have different places. And there's ways that you can go after it that get to the roots of it. Rhizomatic roots of it. If they're called rhizomatic roots, they're offshoots, they're little legs. So let's take a ginger as a rhizome, turmeric, which a lot of people curcumin, I think I'm pronouncing that right, is a rhizome. Strawberries, crabgrass. If you pick it out, it can grow again. If you pick a tree out, chances are it's not going to grow again. You hit the root and you take it out. So with a rhizome, it's a whole, there's like 5, 6, 7 different rhizomatic principles that once you start adopting them and look at the world in this way, you start to scratch your head and just go, wow, I've kind of been conditioned to see the world through a filter. And here's another one that shows me and helps me see all kinds of stuff that I've been missing. And what if I interacted with them? What if I took the arborescent model and the rhizomatic model and used both of them simultaneously? So anyways, I didn't get to much during that seminar. But what did happen was we hit a place where I took them through a couple meditations and then did some questions and answers and telling them about this process, this hypno-mystical process. And I did something different that seminar. I looked at them differently. I had a way that I would consider my audience, and I completely shifted that and changed that. And had tremendous results. And I thought because we didn't hit much of the stuff that my left brain was concerned about, I think that's showing the left brain over there. It actually looks like it's on the right side from the screen, but from my left brain, conceptually, didn't get to much. But then I started asking people if they want to talk about their experiences. And the first lady that started talking and said, wow, she goes, I want to tell you, she goes, I had a pretty severe accident years ago in a car and left my body. And she goes, it was a beautiful experience. And she says, I've been trying to get back there for years and have not been able to get back there. I've been doing this and that, everything impossible. She goes, I got there today. It was like, wow. Another gentleman, the second guy that rated, he says, I professional and been trying to figure out how to, he goes, I do what you're talking about. I'm engaged in the mystical stuff and it's a big part of my life, but I don't know how to bring it to my work, but I do now. And this just kept happening for the rest of the class. And then I had a booth at HypnoThoughts and more people kept coming to my booth. And one lady who's fairly well known at the HypnoThoughts, and it's 1,000 or more people, pretty close-knit group, but a big group. We'd eat every day for lunch, and it was awesome to see 800 people, 1,000 people eating lunch, good lunches too, all at the same time. Anyway, she came by my booth. She goes, I want to tell you something. I said, yeah, I'm open. She goes, a friend of mine was at your seminar, and she thought it was like the best seminar she'd been to, and she had a life-changing experience. And I said, oh, wow, thanks. She goes, no, I don't think you're listening to me. She goes, life-changing experience. And I said, I'm going to take that deeper and let that really soak in. She goes, I wouldn't come up and tell you this if I didn't mean it. You know who I am? And I'm like, I absolutely know who you are. And I'm taking it from that level of that. And so that happened several times, not to that level, but I realized getting from the beginning of this, of the shifts and the changes, this is what I want to do. I want to teach people this stuff. I want to do it through coaching. I want to do it through teaching, let you experience this at home. So I decided that I had 2 hours of video. I had a friend of mine. I used my camera equipment. Flew a friend of mine in from Texas. Some of you may remember him from my old podcasts. Anyways, he came in and filmed me. I said, "Can you be my cameraman?" And so I got a couple hours there, and then I had another seminar that I did for 3 hours that had a lot to do about lining up your body and being congruent. And so I figured, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take those 5 hours and I'm going to add a bunch of material to each. I'm going to stop it and then do some explanation about what I just was talking about and what I know at this point that might be different from that, and keep updating that. And I'm going to do some question and answer things. So what I'm doing is I'm going to create a course online, the Hypno-Mystic Change Work course, how to change yourself, how to change others, because it's a mutual type of a thing. It's a mutual. What you do, how you feel, what you change yourself really starts to affect and shift and change other people. I have another friend that we had a 2-3 year coaching process that we done that recently came to an end. You know, he was just saying, I don't know what else to work on. And he goes, I'm going to play with this myself. And I said, that's fine. I said, if you need to come back, come back. But he's one of the guys that we wouldn't do 3-4 hour sessions because we were friends. We'd talk about different things, and then we'd start to settle down. And one of the things when I was talking to Jamie Smart today, I used a metaphor of, like, say, a side view of the ocean. You know, you look at the top of the ocean, you got waves, you could have all kinds of turbulence, people on there, animals, different things that can create distractions for you. And when you do an hour phone call coaching session, you get down into some depth, but these distractions don't let go that easy. When you start getting into 2, 3, 4, doing a whole day session, doing 3 days, coaching session, which I'm working on a program for a 3-day coaching, in-person program, coaching program. Something happens when you have people's awareness focused on a client for that long of a period of time, and the client themselves we keep bringing them back to the awareness of who they are to get them in touch with these inner insights. Things slow down, and then people start to get in touch with that, and they start to recognize it. And to me, it's similar to riding a bike or going swimming, learning those things. They say your body changes every year or every 7 years, but I learned to swim when I was a kid. I learned to ride a bike when I was a kid. Sometimes I didn't ride a bike for 20-something years at one point. Got on a bike and rode it right away. If my body's changing that much, where does that knowledge come from? Where is that in me? Or is it outside me? Or is it inside me? What if it's all of them? And then how do we access and connect to that? So this client, he's a trainer in the European Union, let's say. And sometimes he'd call and he says, I have nothing today. I have nothing. I said, that's okay. Let's just start talking and see what comes up. Let's see what happens. But yet to hold that space. And probably the last 3-4 calls that we did were long calls. And things would begin to happen where a lot of the surface stuff was not interfering with the depth of where we went. So it was maintaining that place for a long period of time, deep down inside. And because it was so still down there, a lot of times when something would come up, it wasn't turbulent with a lot of things. Like when I talk, I still say it to clients. I say, you know, when you first start this stuff, a lot of times it's like a metaphor that I use is, imagine you have a Coke bottle and you shake that Coke bottle up, or you pour Coke into a glass, and then there's a head there with all kinds of bubbles similar to a beer. But sooner or later, those bubbles start to dissipate. When you stay in this for a long period of time, they start to dissipate, and then it'll go flat. That's kind of like the surface. When you start to get deeper and deeper, there's very few bubbles. And if they do come up, that attention and awareness you can put on them becomes much clearer because there's not as many distractions. So if there are belief systems, thoughts, ideas, interpretations, I find there's a lot of the way people interpret words. I had a guy the other day, I went to a 3P meeting, and I'd like to get into this more, and I will when I start doing the course. I'm going to get deeper and go into it. And hopefully you're on with me with some of these calls. We'll probably do it through Zoom. But he had a facet which was blocked off. And the only thing he saw, let's say from the outside, was work. What work meant to him. This was work, and it's hard. It meant it was hard. It meant he didn't have the time to do it. Da, da, da. But changing his definition, or his route, his bridge to work opened up a pathway for him where he popped. He had a real pop experience because of what. So he went through the process of shifting the word work. Once the word work had shifted, that opening was big enough because they were talking about spiritual stuff that it didn't just stop at the definition. This is my opinion of what happened, that it was able to continue to go into his spiritual self, and he started to see himself from that place. Who he is not fell away, and what was left was more of who he was. So that's kind of where I'm going with this. The guy that the last few sessions that I worked with, still a great friend. We're still having conversations. He got to the point where he could not see something before, and we'd been trying for a long period of time. He'd been trying. Went through some dangerous disease stuff, let's put it that way, and was still around and still kicking and doing well. And it's just like, find out who you are. See if you can find out who you are. And he was able to see certain things simultaneously within him that he'd never seen before. Because it was kind of like a switch, you're angry and you're not angry. People get drunk and say, I don't remember a thing about it. What happened? They were in a different ego. An alter ego is what I call them. So you got these different alter egos. And one alter ego can't, like if you talk about sometimes with multiple personalities, they don't recognize things from another one. Sometimes there's smoker in one ego and not smoker in another. They're addicted to something in one ego. They're not in another personality. So getting them to be able to see that other ego simultaneously is one of the big keys here. And he finally got to see both of those together. And what it did is it created a third identity, a different identity, because he realized, like I said earlier with the lying, that wasn't him. That wasn't who he was. And the thoughts that came from that identity were different because they were more connected upwards. He had aha experiences, which is kind of more in gamma frequencies when we talk about binaural beats and everything. And so he was in touch with, let's see, the more B. He saw, experienced, felt, had a knowing from B that was more like a psychedelic experience. I've been having them myself, having some really unique experiences and seeing how this works and starting to let and look for other perspectives within me. And I'm thinking, why be selfish with this? I'm doing this now with pretty well all my clients. I still do some work with clients just to help them through an issue and a problem. They don't want to do it. But primarily I want to see where this goes and how far we can go with this and really go forward to say, how can we use our issues, our problem, our resistance to find out who we are and to find out who we're not. So if we can stay, if these problems exist, they were assembled somehow, some way, through your parents, through culture, through school, through church, through synagogue, whatever it is, they were assembled in a certain way. That means they can be disassembled in my mind. And if you start to disassemble that stuff, Jerry, who I told you about earlier, I asked him, like, what happened to him? How did he get in? Well, he says, I kind of left breadcrumbs. I remember exactly what I did. He goes, I was using NLP. And he says, I would started taking my patterns apart. And he goes, and I popped. So I've held on to that since late 90s when I heard him say that. And then I start looking at other spiritual books that I'd known from years before. Some of them, Stephen Walensky's work, The Not I, The Not Self, and how these patterns that we create from these identities, and I say identities, I, or I, me, identities, if we can start to separate them out And I got lots of tools to help you with separating them out that work, and start to find out that these are little it's like opening a door and then all of a sudden part of you floods out. There's an energy that comes in, a pattern that comes in. That most of the time people are just like, they don't get all excited. Okay, I'm going to go out and create a victory and I'm going to win a race and I'm going to do. No, they usually sit back and just go, wow, wow, wow. I worked with a guy, a golfer years ago, and the guy is like 40 years old, has had gray hair, had 4 heart attacks, and so I figured, let's play with some of this. I did some work with a friend of mine, Catherine. This had to be the late 90s, mid to late 90s. She brought me down to Philadelphia to work with some clients, and I worked with this guy, and this opened up for him, and he's like, well, he just sat there. Now he owned, I don't know how many restaurants, drove up in the top of the line black Mercedes when he came in there, played golf, but just getting to the next level, even if it was small, he was spending tremendous amounts of alter ego energy on this. I mean, he wasn't even in touch with his body. So he worked on getting him in touch with his body and then taking his body and mind, his whole self, and then start to bring him to a higher level to find out who he really is. And he had one of those experiences where I'd asked him a couple questions, we redefined some things, and it kind of hit him, and he just went, wow, wow. And then he kind of leaned forward, and he had his hands like this, and he goes, you're not going to do this. And I'm like, do what? He goes, you're not going to make me cry. I said, I'm not trying to make you cry. I said, but this is the brass ring you've been after for a long period of time. And I said, here it is. This is what you've been having. You've been working so hard to get, and you didn't do anything to get it now. It's there. It's available to you right now. You're feeling it. You're experiencing it. You don't have to cry, or you can cry. I can leave the room and walk out and give you alone time, or you can just sit back and enjoy this. Once we become informed from this perspective, we start to learn to do this, to get in touch with this more. It's like being informed from the most massive, incredible computer that gives information, but information in feelings, pictures, sound, all the 5 senses, but then something deeper inside of you starts to activate. You feel your heart, you feel your belly, you feel your body, and you're realizing, oh my gosh, they're getting information. I've been up here, main specifically left brain, locked in with concepts, concept upon concept, like a Russian dial, one dial within another dial, within another dial, within another dial. Now that inner dial, how much information is that inner dial getting? How is that being informed? It's not, except for the dials, the concepts outside of it. But what if you open up all those dials and just let them out into the open? They'd be informed quite differently, wouldn't they? They'd see all the different dials that they're within, what's not the dials, again, what's not you, what's not it. It opens up a whole different experience when you realize who you are. But the first thing you got to start doing is getting in touch with what you are that you've been given here in your body. And what's blocking you from, because a lot of times when we go into our left concepts, we go into our brain, what's blocking us, it the best word I could think of is bifurcate, but it basically detours us. It detours us, it throws us to another concept. Boom, back in the left brain. So let's say we start to go down into our heart. We start to go down into our belly, or feeling their hands and our legs and just our skin. And that has information that it will inform us. But then but I got something else. There was a, I'm going to go ahead and tell this story. There was a meeting that I went to where somebody was there. Is a husband and wife, and the people were not informed by NLP or to be able to make some of the distinctions that were going on. And I'm listening and watching this lady, and there was some people that was working with her, and I didn't want to step on their toes, but she kept showing over and over and over again how she was blocked and not her. And I said, can I be rude and ask a question? I said, so you're telling me, and she was very fast visual. So she was in her pictures were dominating her experience. And at one point she said, that something opened up and she started feeling love and everything. Well, when she did that, she started slowing down, and her hand movements changed, her body changed, and she kept touching her heart. Was it her left hand, or nope, I'm lying. It was her right hand. She kept touching her heart with her right hand. And so I said, "Can I ask you a question?" I said, so she was there, but then next thing you know, she was really pretty lady, very professional, and she. I'm not going to say that. So I asked her. I says, "What is it? What's that going on?" She goes, "Well, it's not this, and it's not this, and it's not this." And she's looking up, and I'm looking with you move my eyes because you can really tell when somebody's in visual when they're moving their eyes back and forth. And they're all up in their head. They're kind of up in their left brain. They're seeing concepts, visual concepts, just running through. I said, "That's great." I said, "That's great. You're telling me everything that it's not. Now tell me what it is again, please." And she just stopped and she went down into her body. And she used the right hand thing. She's like, "Well, it's love, and it's kind of like a peace and a joy." And so then I'm asking, I'm like, "Well, how do you do this? How do you make this happen? How do you know when to do this?" They asked some other questions, but I'm sitting up because I want to show you what she did. But she got really congruent, because before she wasn't really congruent at all. She got very congruent. She says, "I don't know, but it just arises in me." Notice the hands together, same time. Before, she's doing right hand, she's doing left hand, but so we got the split brain. So she's accessing different parts, but they're not congruous, whatever word it is. And she goes, "I don't know, it just arises in me." And I'm looking, I'm saying, "Does anybody else see this? You could use this. This is beautiful." She was showing her road in. So I would take that road, keep her there for a little while, and have her explore it even deeper so that we could bookmark this and platform this so she could build a steady platform to be able to get there, to be able to maybe start even to see what her concepts are, how her concepts pull her out of her body. So I'm giving you a lot of deep stuff right now, but basically the concepts is she's up in her brain, she's visual, she's not in her body. I could probably go over there and pinch her on her foot and she would have no clue. It's kind of similar to what they do with a lot of times with hypnosis, is get people in a deep trance and then they can take them through opera. I know one lady who went through 32 fillings using nothing but hypnosis, no anesthetic. She couldn't have anesthetic. So hypnosis has a way, it utilizes that part of us that just goes into concept. Well, kind of what hypnosis is, monoideism, one idea. Where are they getting the ideas from? The brain, the left brain, concepts. So she's up in her concepts. How do I get her back in her body? Now she's going to be informed differently as this arises. But the connection is not there. So I wrote the guy that was working to her after the seminar and said, "Hey, look, I've got some insights," because that's the words that they like to use. I got some insights that really were powerful that came in for this lady, and I'd like to give them to you because I didn't want to step on your toes and make it into a coaching session. I haven't heard back from them, so not sure what to. Oop, my chair is getting a little off the platform here. Excuse me. What to do? Anyways, so the people that I am doing this with are having different experiences. So I can use NLP, I can use hypnosis, whatever, rhizomatic principles to do basic work. And if that's what people want, then I'll just continue to do basic work. But one of the first questions I ask people when I get online, what are your spiritual beliefs? And do you mind if we work within your spiritual beliefs? And I don't care what it is. If you're Jewish, you're Muslim, I don't care. Christian, I can work with you more. I mean, that's my belief system. So I can really going deep. And I remember a lot of stuff that I learned from years of studying Christian principles and Christian mystics and great pastors. I lived in the South for I don't know, 12, 13 years and went to a lot of different churches and learned a lot of things. Somebody's Jewish. I've worked with a lot of Jewish people. I can go, I'll work with it because it's not about content specifically or trying to convert somebody. It's about how do they process their information, and their spiritual identity is like at the top of the list, who they believe they are as a spiritual person. If I get an atheist, yeah, I can work with an atheist and work with atheists and help them. That's funny. Some of the books I'm reading on psychedelics, how some of the people said they weren't believers in God, but when they let the default mode network go, how much information was in there that um, they had no idea existed, and could a God exist within that information? A lot of them still maintain in the default mode network that they're atheists, but they know something else is going on. So you could have that same experience without having to take psychedelics or microdosing, which are low doses of psychedelics. You can do this with mind practices. It's really cool. It's really fun. Enough for me to say, this is where I want to go full time. Into the hypno-mystic change work. I'm hypno-mystic because of the hypnosis. It'll probably end up being mystic change work or something. I love mysticism. I love the idea of figuring out the mysteries of necessarily what we necessarily don't know. What we don't know. You know, Einstein, this is a story that I'd heard about Einstein, that somebody said something about, he was in an argument about whether God existed or not. And this is verbatim. This is my version of how I remember it. And if you know different, send me the story. I'd love to upgrade it and update it to get it proper if I'm off. Where they said, do you believe in God? And he says, of course, you got to believe in God. And he says, well, no, I'm an atheist. He goes, you can't really be an atheist. And the guy was like, what do you mean? And Einstein said, well, he goes, okay, so you've been saying I'm the smartest guy in the world, right? At the time, which is the early 19th century, so he asked him the question, he goes, how much information, world information, do you think I know right now? And they had some kind of back and forth, and what I remember from the story, they got to maybe 3% of the world's knowledge. And then Einstein asked the guy, he says, how can you say in the 97% of the knowledge that I don't know that God doesn't exist within that? And he had the guy. He goes, the best, most intellectually honest thing you can say is I'm an agnostic. I doubt it. I doubt there's a God. That's intellectually honest. But you can't say there's no God. Otherwise, you'd have to know all the information. And then you might be God. Anyway, so the default mode network, let's look at that one more time. And the difference when you start to take psychedelics, people all the time say they saw God. They had an experience of God. They saw God as themselves. They saw God within them. They saw where God existed. They felt, they experienced this process within them. So this default mode network is pretty conditioned over on A to let us see the world. It's been a lot of years through teachers and parents and TV and the internet, all kinds of things that get us to see the world in a certain way that works for them. But does it work for us? Does it work for us? Or does B seem to maybe work for us? That's what I'm interested in. Let's find out about who we really are and what we might have been missing in the meantime. You know, political differences aside, whatever, let's just kind of isolate this. Isolate to say, let's explore this area and see where it takes us, and maybe kind of put the political stuff or whatever your belief systems are aside and say, let's explore this together. So I'll be working on this. I'm hoping to have this up by the first of the year. I'm going to look at. Hey, sorry about that. I had this little device right here, back here, and I leaned back a little too hard and cut off a few minutes with the mute button accidentally. Anyways, do my best to go back and remember what I was saying. I took a drink of water and then basically said, keep in touch with me. Let me know what's going on with you and if this interests you at all and what questions you have. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start doing several Zoom groups. One of them is going to be open to the public. The other one's going to be more closed, that we're going to do as part of the course, the Hypno-Mystic Changework course, where I'll do some real-time coaching and we'll get into some depth of these principles and what they could mean to you, help you to start discovering what stops you, what blocks you, what's in the way of seeing who you really are and experiencing who you really are. That's the whole thing. When you get when your whole body opens up and then you go into something that's even bigger than your body and you connect with that, there is a mental health that you already have innate in you, inside you, that exists in you. There's a physical well-being that's already there, that exists. People are having all kinds of things happen with them with their mental health where they're depressed or suicidal and they're no longer because they pop out of it. Physical problems gone or dramatically reduced or going away. It's like entering into a different place, and a lot of times the pressure from the default mode network or that alter ego that's there can create illnesses and not wellness. Again, who you're not. But if you start to get in touch with and enter into this place, there's such a feeling in your body, such a calmness in your mind and your thoughts, that your body and your mind, what you're in at this time, gets informed by this other energy and starts to heal you. And you can feel it. And you can hear the absence of things that may have been causing problems when your mind goes quiet or a lot quieter. It's really an incredible experience, and let's learn how to do this more efficiently and teach this to other people and make the world a better place that way. But primarily start with yourself. Starting with myself, I want to reach outwards, expand that a little bit, more of an inner circle, and expand that out even further. So I'd love for you to be a part of this and explore this with me. And in the process, like I said, I'll be teaching you hypnosis, NLP, spiritual principles. Uh, there's just so much. Just the stuff on the cards would probably be enough for a 12-week course. The ones that I wasn't able to use during the Hypno Thoughts 2019. One of the things that I thought I would do was the way I did it in the past, the way I created DVDs and products. And I want to leave you with this. And what's happened is when I enter into this newer way of thinking and experiencing the world, I can't make products like I used to. I realize I'm stuck on the old method, and I can't do that anymore, because by the time I try to remember that information, so much new stuff has come in that it makes the old stuff maybe not irrelevant, but the experience that I'm going through is part of the knowledge. That's why it has to be more in real time. And I understand what Jerry was telling me. I don't know till they get here what they want to learn. I'll know when you get there. Get here. Get on a call. And we start to go back and forth, and you'll discover what's here available to you now in the midst of the now, of reality here. The healing mind, the healing body, the healing spirit that's right there, right here, right now. Let's explore this together. This is Mark J. Ryan. Thanks for listening, and hope to talk to you soon. Bye-bye.